Hello, listeners. Thanks for tuning in. I have to do a quick intro here. Feel free to put it on double time speed and I'll sound like one of those pharmaceutical commercials. This is another bonus episode that we've been calling Dr. Zorba's Rapid Response. We'll release these shorter episodes periodically whenever there's breaking health news that Zorba feels he needs to clarify. More than ever, there's a lot of confusion and misinformation swirling around, especially when it comes to health issues. So Zorba believes it's crucial to offer up science-based analysis so folks can make informed decisions for themselves and their loved ones. There's two parts to this. First, Zorba reacts to the CDC Advisory Committee's recent recommendations surrounding the measles, mumps, and rubella, the MMR vaccine, and chickenpox vaccine, sometimes called the MMRV. And part two is Zorba's thoughts on the new recommendations from that same committee regarding COVID-19 vaccines. And just a quick contextual note before I hand it off to the real expert. This CDC committee, it's called the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, was handpicked by the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and as of recording this intro, right now, October 9th, 2025, this committee recommended expanding access to COVID-19 vaccinations during pregnancy, essentially undoing an earlier recommendation from the Secretary to stop recommending that pregnant women get these vaccines. So thanks again for listening. Here's the good doc.
Hi, this is Dr. Zorba Paster with a reply to the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices from the CDC. So let me talk about the recommendations. So first of all, you've got the MMR vaccine, measles, mumps, and rubella, and you've got varicella vaccine, which is chickenpox. So 85% of the children in this country get those vaccines, but they're in separate shots. The MMR is in one shot, and the varicella is in another shot. 5 to 15% of the kids, depending on which state you live in, actually get the combination shot. Now, the risk of getting a febrile seizure, that is, getting a seizure because you actually had the immunization with MMR, is roughly 1 in 4,000. The risk of getting a febrile seizure with the MMRV vaccine, measles, mumps, and rubella, along with varicella, is 1 in 2,000. So it's double risk, very small, but still a doubling of the risk. So the recommendation all along is basically to get rid of this combination vaccine. And like I said, 85% of the children in this country get them in 2 separate shots. Now, keep in mind that if you get measles, a febrile seizure occurs in roughly 2 to 5% of the children. In other words, in roughly 1 out of 20 to 1 out of 40 children get a febrile seizure. That is a large number compared to 1 out of 4,000 with the vaccine. So you've got to take that into consideration when you're making your decision. So the recommendation is to get rid of the MMRV. I don't think it's a bad recommendation at all, and especially since so many kids are getting it separately. You know, the measles, mumps, and rubella separate from the varicella. Why not do it? Now, I think it's so important to get vaccinated for these diseases. I had measles, I had mumps, I had rubella, and I had varicella. And let me tell you, it was not a fun time. I remember I was in Chicago and I had measles, and my mother thought that measles would make you blind. So I was in a dark room for about 10 days to 2 weeks, didn't have a TV on, didn't read. She fed me boiled beef. It was a terrible time in Chicago. It was hot and we didn't have air conditioning. It was terrible. So the childhood diseases are much, much worse than the absolute minimal risk factor of getting the vaccine. But we have many people, especially young adults with children, who have become vaccine hesitant. I understand that. There's a lot of information out there, a lot of podcasts where people are touting anti-science rhetoric, a lot of comedians and actors and actresses, people who look prominent who are touting anti-vaccine. They're saying that vaccines cause autism. They do not cause autism. There's very good research on that. So if you know of a young adult who has a child who is debating whether or not they should vaccinate their child, you ought to talk to them about this. And while we're at it, let me give you some statistics. What 2 states do you think are number 1 and number 2 in giving childhood vaccinations before children enter kindergarten? So number 1 and number 2 states are, anybody? Mississippi and West Virginia. Wisconsin happens to be 49 in the state. We are number 49 in childhood immunizations. And that, my friends, is an abomination. Hi, this is my rapid response to the CDC Advisory Committee on Immunization Practice and their recommendation for COVID-19. So they had a few recommendations that I think are really worth thinking about. So the recommendation is every person who gets a COVID vaccine should do a risk-benefit analysis of whether or not it is in their best interest to get the COVID-19 vaccine. I don't have any problem with that at all. I just want to make sure it's covered, and it continues to be covered by Medicare, Medicaid, as well as insurance plans through the federal health insurance marketplace. I think that's really, really important. They said that they should have a discussion. They didn't define what that discussion had to be and how long it had to be with their pharmacist, if the pharmacist is giving it, or someone appointed by the pharmacist, because it might be a pharmacy tech, with a doctor, nurse practitioner, or PA, or someone appointed by the doctor, nurse practitioner, or PA to determine what the risk-benefit analysis is. Now, the fact is, every time you get an immunization, you should get a sheet of paper that talks about the risks, the benefits, and the risks. And that should be pretty much given you whenever you get your shot. And the most important thing for you to do is to look at that sheet of paper and make a decision. Now, some people read that piece of paper from top to bottom. Other people say, I've made the decision, I've done my own research, and I want to get the immunization. Frankly, anyone who comes in to get a COVID immunization has probably made up their mind. And giving them more information so it can be a shared decision is actually not such a bad idea. The most important thing is that from what I read of what has been going on, that COVID-19 will still be covered, the immunization, by insurance plans and by insurance plans for children throughout the country. That is the key issue. By the way, for more information, come to my website, drzorba.org. Spell it out, Dr. DoctorZorba.org. I've got recipes there, articles. You can look at my CNN interview. We would love to hear from you. We love to answer questions. We love to get emails. And don't forget, you can always write us at askdrzorba@gmail.com. Spell it out, askdrzorba@gmail.com. Thank you very much for listening, and stay well.